Everyone, welcome to the Dome 9 webinar that we'll be doing today. We're just going to take a few minutes to wait for a few more people to join us, and then we will begin. I'm going to put you on hold right now, and I will be back in the next 2 minutes. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Dome 9 webinar, 10 times faster, simpler, more efficient cloud SecOps. My name is Thelen Blum, and I am the Senior Product Marketing Manager here at Dome 9, and I'm here with Patrick Pusher, our Technical Evangelist at Dome 9. Today's webinar, we're going to discuss how to streamline cloud SecOps with better visualization and end-to-end control using a consolidated platform specifically designed for the cloud. We will discuss how the Dome 9 Arc SaaS platform provides a broad set of security and compliance controls that allow you to visualize your cloud assets, evaluate your security posture, and fix misconfigurations quickly. We will close with Q&A at the end of the session. A couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available afterwards. All attendees are in listen-only mode. If you would like to ask questions, please type them in the question window of the GoToWebinar section. You'll see it on the right-hand side of the webinar, and Patrick will address as many questions as possible, time permitting. With that being said, I will now pass the ball to Patrick. Let's get started.
Thank you, Thelen, and thanks everybody for joining us. My name is Patrick Pusher, Technical Evangelist here at Dome 9, and today we're going to have a mixture of slides and hands-on sort of a product showcase from Dome 9. So AWS's shared responsibility model draws a proverbial line in the sand between what AWS is responsible for securing versus what customers are responsible for securing. AWS is responsible for securing the infrastructure that powers the infrastructure as a service platform. This includes the compute, storage, database, and networking infrastructure, as well as the regions, availability zones, and edge locations. As an AWS customer, you are responsible for securing whatever resources you put in the cloud. This includes your data platform, apps, identity and access management, operating systems, and network and firewall configurations. It is this area of customer responsibility that Gartner and other industry analysts predict that the vast majority of security failures will happen. So why is that? Really, it's because security is challenging through the life cycle of a cloud deployment, from planning to deployment to operations to scaling and to compliance and governance. Right? Security at scale is especially challenging when several business units in an organization, for example, are consuming cloud resources in different and unique ways. With initiatives like cloud-first policies, where all innovation gets done on infrastructure as a service platforms. Without this, without the proper visibility, the control, and the governance of those efforts, small security oversights can balloon into really significant challenges. And even on the screen, when we look at the life cycle, there's even kind of a section that isn't on the slide, and that is in the design or architecture phase. There are emerging sort of paradigms under which we manage our infrastructure, things like continuous integration, continuous delivery, immutable infrastructure. And so, with the propensity to not necessarily troubleshoot and fix problems in production, but to go back to the drawing board and to fix problems kind of as the infrastructure is defined as code, and then provisioning on top of existing infrastructure. It's a very different paradigm that the public cloud really makes possible. And so when you think about that amount of change, the security wrapped around that, as with all of these moving pieces, becomes very, very complicated. So Dome9 is an innovative software as a service platform for security and compliance across infrastructure as a service environments, purpose-built really for the enterprise. The Dome9 Arc family, and the Arc family encompasses assess, remediate, and control that practitioners and management alike will find a lot of value in. So these kind of three buckets are often how we think about Dome9. The assess first is gaining the understanding that we need as security practitioners to make informed decisions. Having that constant situational security awareness, understanding the state of our security controls, and more than just the state, how that configuration affects the overall traffic flow in our networking. The remediate sort of bucket, if you will, then is about more than just sort of information. It's about impacting change. So fixing problems inline in Dome9, building a gold standard by which your efforts will be judged going forward, and actively protecting. If we think about assess and remediate, it's about learning about the challenges or the potential data exposure you have, correcting them, and then on this side, on the left-hand side of the slide, the control, right? Being able to, going forward, be a little more preventative than reactive with Dome9. Dome9 allows you to leverage features like Tamper Protection, where if something or somebody tries to make a change to your security configuration, you are, of course, alerted, but then we can go a little bit further in Tamper Protection and actually solve that problem on your behalf, right? No more waking you up at 2 in the morning because of a network security change. Your policy can sort of follow those changes and get out in front of them before they happen. So, as part of the Dome9 family, we really split it up into 3 different product focus areas. The first and the most traditional, I think, for Dome9 being network security. So, we extend visibility and control around concepts like security groups, network ACLs, VPC configuration, instance to security group assignment, really that fundamental networking challenge, and the one that, if you recall back to the shared responsibility model slide, that firewall configuration kind of a use case. Then in the middle we have compliance and governance, where much broader than just network security, Dome9 has visibility into all sorts of capabilities on the public cloud, AWS, Azure, and watch this space for more platforms soon. So we're talking about things like yes, network security, port access kinds of observations and measurements, but then also across more than just network security, across IAM. How many users do you have with MFA turned on? How many users do you have that conform to a proper sort of password policy? Are you rotating keys in AWS KMS? These kind of things that are much broader than your traditional kind of network security focus. And then on the right-hand side, the advanced IAM protection. So when we talk about identity and access management, adding an additional layer of security onto what's already afforded to us by AWS. So, having said that, we're going to look at a few key features of the Dome9 platform. I'll introduce them to you kind of on a slide basis. We'll talk a little bit about the value, and then I'll pivot to the product and actually show you these firsthand. So the first thing is a tool we have called Clarity that definitely falls in that assessment bucket, right? If we're thinking about the assessment, remediate, and control sort of designation we spoke about earlier. And Clarity is very, very good at exposing the potential traffic flows through any given network, and really sort of teasing out the detail that you need to understand the risk associated with that exposure. With that, maybe let's have a look at it, and what we're going to do is take a look at a particular VPC within AWS, and we'll take a look at the kind of information Clarity can give us very, very quickly. So let's pop into Clarity. One of the first things you'll notice is that we can use Clarity against a live environment or against a CloudFormation template. You know, when we talked about that life cycle of security slide, you know, in that design phase, again, depending on how you manage your infrastructure, you can get Dome9 involved there as well. This will make more sense once we have a look at it, so let's do that. We'll choose one of the accounts we have connected to Dome9, and it's important to note here that you can bring many cloud accounts to your single Dome9 account to manage consistently across them from a security perspective. And but this particular tool, kind of the unit of measurement is a region initially. We'll look at the VPC relationships in that region, and then we'll dive a little bit deeper into a particular VPC. So let's do that. Now what you see on the screen, and I'll zoom this up a little bit, it's probably a little bit tough to read, are all the VPCs in this particular region and the relationships between them. So for example, you can see here that we have a prod 1 VPC with kind of a spoken hub architecture where, you know, this kind of architecture we see more prominently where, you know, one main VPC is tasked to do traffic sort of in and out of the network, and then you know, you're separating kind of your tiers with the other. So you might have a database tier, a web serving tier, a monitoring tier, and so on. This is a big architecture, but it's something that we see more and more. On this side, we have a similar kind of representation, but now we have something on the right-hand side here in a dotted line that says unmanaged. This is a VPC peering relationship with an account that is, with a VPC that is not in this account. In fact, it's an account that is not managed by Dome9 at all, yet because that relationship is described within a VPC that does exist here, we can visualize that for you. So it's really about understanding the relationships, if any. I mean, we have VPCs down here at the bottom that don't have relationships. Actually, I guess we have one, right? It's kind of a standalone island, and that's important to know as well. So once we understand this, we will select a particular VPC. In this case, it's main demo. When you do that, you have a quick sort of synopsis of what to expect for resources inside. And then the more detailed view, once we select our VPC, is really about your security groups. And again, which of them are accepting traffic from the outside, either broadly or somewhat, versus which security groups are tucked nice and neatly back on the internals of your network, only accepting traffic from internal hosts and other AWS security groups in this particular VPC. So what you see are security groups arranged in this kind of swim lane fashion. If I click on something in the DMZ and I've clicked on my load balancer security group, on the right-hand side, Dome9 will highlight which rule is the offender, which rule or which rules really rank the security group into this DMZ swim lane. And in this case, it's a very broad port policy on HTTPS port 443. This isn't necessarily an error, but it is called out very clearly for you to make that judgment, right? In the case of a load balancer, you would expect it to be out in the front of your network, accepting broad traffic and then judging kind of where to send it within your network. But then right below, I see that I have a default security group here too. And if I click that, in this case, it's an SSH rule that is open to the entire internet. You know, that is certainly not a best practice. Typically, default security groups are left empty and not used. However, here I can see that both of those things are not true. We have rules, and the number 1 in the top right-hand area of this box tells me I do have a resource assigned to the default security group. So this is a problem, and it's a problem that Clarity makes evident without even making a single click. Right? When I came into the Clarity representation, I could tell right away there's a problem with my default security group. And then as I dig deeper and I click, Dome9 will model the potential traffic flows in your network. So default, at least on one or more services, is accepting broad traffic from the internet. That's where you see that orange sort of ingress line. And then it's also accepting traffic from a web monitor security group, and it's sending traffic to a web server security group. So Very easily, I can tell exactly where all traffic is able to flow through my network. So, the DMZ is one or more services with a very, very permissive port, kind of an any rule, if you will. The partially open security groups have some whitelisted sort of access permitted from the outside, but not nearly as permissive as the DMZ. And then the internal zone is really about those security groups that are, protected back here with no direct traffic flow from the outside. So that's the initial perspective Clarity gives you. The other thing that it's very, very good at, and actually there's a few more things, but what we'll talk about today is VPC flow log integration. So now if you check this box up at the top, as you saw me just do, in about 7 to 10 seconds, we will fetch all of this log information. And VPC flow logs are firewall filter logs as a service, right? No more installing agents in each workload, filtering traffic and aggregating the logs from each host. Now we can consume this information sort of as a service from AWS. So when you click that, we paint these little red legends on the bottom right of each security group. And these little red legends have to do with how much drop traffic each security group has processed, right? And that's a really great starting point if you're doing a regular security audit, because now you have some sort of indication. My common SG security group, for example, has dropped a heck of a lot more traffic than has my default or than has monitoring. So that allows me a really great starting point to understand, is this misconfiguration based? Do I have a service that I might have stood up, but maybe service A to talk to service B, but perhaps service B wasn't configured to listen properly? That would be a scenario where I would drop a lot of traffic. As to would be something going on in your network that might not be malicious, but might need further investigation, right? So by clicking on a security group, we're able to work with this AWS flow log data in a nice kind of human readable fashion. If you tried to work with this data before, you know that it's not unlike really any other firewall filter log. It's complex and it's not really aggregated in a logical way. That's what we bring to flow logs by incorporating them into Clarity and then having you have this information at your fingertips. We do find most customers do leverage flow logs, but maybe not in a tactical sort of day-to-day way. They might send them to an S3 bucket. They might archive them for usage later if need be. But we think there is a wealth of information in that log source, and so we've brought that information into Clarity. Okay, let's pivot back to the deck, and we will talk a little bit more about a few more Dome 9 capabilities that really speak to much more efficient operations. So let me bring that up. Okay. So one of the notions in Dome 9 that maybe is a little more challenging to show than Clarity, but certainly every bit as powerful, is one called Tamper Protection. So Dome 9 is continuously monitoring your infrastructure as a service provider to understand when security controls change. When they do change, if your toggle of protection mode, if you look on the left-hand side of the screen there, is in read-only, Dome 9 will notify you that, hey, something outside of Dome 9 has changed your security configuration. Obviously, that's a big part of understanding your security situational awareness. In full protection mode, we'll go a little bit further. We'll send you that notification, but that Dome 9 will actively revert the change that happened back to the policy that you've built in the product. So in that way, Dome 9 can be your enforcement kind of vehicle to make sure that changes conform to a standard that you define, rather than incoming changes from users at the AWS console, first run of a new automation script, maybe even a different third-party product that you have onboarded into your sort of infrastructure as a service ecosystem, if you will. Any incoming change, regardless of what avenue, Dome 9 will detect, and if in full protection, will prevent. So it's kind of outside of the realm of Clarity for network visibility, we're now kind of into the control sort of bucket of the ARC platform, the ARC. This product, IAM Safety, is a little bit different than the network security side we've been talking about so far. IAM Safety is an additional way to secure your identity and access management capabilities, for lack of a better word. So imagine an event where credentials are compromised. You have a privileged account on AWS, and I'm somehow able to log in as you. right? Typically, our last line of defense are our credentials. With Dome9 IAM Safety, we add an additional layer of defense, past that point. If I'm able to steal your credentials and log in as you, and you have a privileged account, IAM Safety will prevent me from being able to utilize the most dangerous or sensitive operations on AWS. Let me show you how that looks. So I'm going to go ahead and click on IAM Safety. And the process really starts with you thinking about, again, what the most disastrous kinds of capabilities afforded to us by AWS, have fallen into the wrong hands. And to do that, you use our restricted policy editor. And if you are a storage customer, for example, you might really consider the ability to delete a storage bucket as something that is critical and very sensitive. So think about all of the services you consume across AWS and build this template out. And a quick hint is, yes, you can search by technology, but you can also search by operation, right? So if I type in delete, I'll get a really handy kind of inventory of all of the delete operations that IAM supports. So that's a kind of a time-saving technique. But regardless of how you build this, go across all the services you consume and mark the most sensitive operations as part of your Dome9 IAM Safety restricted policy. That's step one. The next step then is to decide, and Dome9 will inventory all of your IAM users and IAM roles. The next step is to decide how narrowly or how broadly to apply that policy. I can do that kind of by user, but I can also do it with this Protect All button. And that Protect All button will immediately take away the rights that I put in that restricted policy, if we're following the last example, that ability to delete an S3 storage bucket, away from all of my users, right? So that's step two. Step three then is thinking about those trusted users that from time to time will need to delete that S3 storage bucket, for example, legitimately. For them, they need a path to be able to do this, and that's accomplished using the Dome9 IAM Safety out-of-band application, at least from a workstation perspective. So this application is available for both iOS and Android, and it allows a user, if their rights, their sort of organic and native rights as part of their IAM policy at AWS allows them to do it in the first place, it allows them to elevate their rights for a short period of time, perform that sensitive action, and then fall back down to their less privileged state day to day. The implication being, of course, that if I steal your credentials, I'm going to get access to that less privileged state, right? I'm not going to have your IAM Safety application that you use to elevate your rights. I'm going to get that less privileged set of capabilities with those credentials that I've been able to compromise. Let me show you how this works. So we'll go to our AWS console here, and for the sake of this example, we will consider that we're a DNS administrator, right? So we go into Route 53 to do some work. The first thing you notice is that I have errors all the way across the screen. That's because my administrator put everything to do with IAM Safety in that restricted policy. Thankfully, they also paired me up with the Dome9 IAM Safety application, so now I can self-serve my way to gaining access to these permissions and capabilities for a short period of time, to do whatever I have to do, zone manipulation in DNS, for example. And then when I'm done, I'll fall back down to that less privileged state whereby, again, any kind of credential compromise event isn't disastrous anymore. So let me do that. So I've got my trusty Android simulator here, and I'll run my IAM Safety application, and I'll elevate my rights. Right, so I'll click this button, and if it's a little bit too small there, what it says, I have 15 minutes of this level of privilege left. So if I come back to the AWS console and I click reload, I will now see that I do have the access to do what I need to do. So now I have access to these privileged capabilities for a very short interval, for 15 minutes. If I am a sort of security conscious employee, I will not wait that 15 minutes. I'll do whatever I need to do, and then I'll actively stop my IAM Safety session, such that I'll fall back to that less privileged state. Right? Come back to the console, hit reload, and away you go. So, we are protecting again against the very most sensitive services as defined by you as that last layer of defense, that additional layer, so that we don't have this sort of code spaces kind of event where that compromise at the console is possible. No more kind of ransomware type events. You can protect all of the encrypt, decrypt operations if you'd like. It's that sort of protection that IAM Safety is sort of squarely built to provide. Okay, back to our slides. Region lock is a feature that I won't show you hands-on in the product, but we'll talk about. Region lock is sort of related to Tamper Protection a little bit, whereby Tamper Protection is for existing security groups when they change. Kind of, do you want to accept those changes or do you want to reject them? Region lock is similar, except it's for incoming brand new security groups, right? When Dome9 detects that a security group has been made in any other kind of way other than Dome9, this is the policy you will set per region on how you want to treat those incoming new security groups. Do you want to bring them on, but have them in read-only or monitor-only mode, whereby if changes happen, again, you're informed, but they're allowed to stand? Do you want to bring in that security group and immediately turn Tamper Protection on, such that nobody or nothing else outside of Dome9 can change it? Or for less trusted environments, do you want to bring that security group into Dome9 but then clear it, really forcing the administration of that group from Dome9 itself specifically? That's your third option. So this is really a policy around new incoming security groups, how you want them to be handled within Dome9. And then I think this will probably be the last feature we show in a hands-on way, and then we'll wrap up a little bit talking about the rest of the Dome9 platform that we won't show you today. This is a really unique feature. It's one of the ones that, as a Dome9 customer, much before I joined the company, that I really found very unique and very powerful. Dynamic access leasing is really about time-limited, on-demand access to any service that isn't intended for the general public. Services like SSH or RDP or anything else administrative and sensitive like that are great. They're sort of low-hanging fruit for a feature like this, but it really is intended for anything that you want to gain access to in a very secure kind of way that isn't intended for everybody. And it is the single feature we have that is built for the end user to leverage, and not necessarily the security administrator or security practitioner. So let's have a look at how this works. So dynamic access leasing, again, is really all about taking a service. In this case, the example we're going to use is remote desktop, and reducing the attack surface. What we typically do when we have a service like this and we don't know exactly who will be consuming it in the future from an IP address perspective, we will open up a range, a scope of IPs, so that we're confident the desired sort will fall into. That in itself is a challenge. That is creating kind of an attack surface on a sensitive service like RDP that exposes it to a larger degree than is really necessary, especially under this kind of a dynamic access leasing paradigm. So if you bring that service like we've done here in this example, what you're doing is you're reducing that general attack surface down to nothing. Right? If I do a port scan on this service, I will get no result. Yet as somebody who belongs to this organization who needs to consume it, I can come to Dome9 with the right level of access, of course, and click this Get Access button. And when I do, you'll find that what we call a lease is issued. Dome9 figures out where I am from an IP address perspective. I belong to a class of user that gets 1 hour of access at a time. So at 11:28 a.m. my local time here, I will cease to have access to this RDP service. I can come back and obtain another lease if I'd like, but my level of access says that I have kind of 1 hour at a time, which really under the covers, what's happening is that Dome9 is handling the life cycle of a firewall exception. Right? How we used to do this before is either we would just leave that port wide open, which it is really not a good idea, or we would have kind of a manual process to be able to open up sort of access into services with a help desk ticket, for example, which certainly is a very sort of a laborious process, right? That there's a lot to that. The vision that we have for dynamic access leasing is that someone sets up the access to do this. Of course, your administrator, but then end users will sort of self-serve their own access as they need to access sensitive services. Now, we've been talking about this path where it's used interactively, but just like any other Dome9 feature, this can be consumed sort of pragmatically through the use of the Dome9 API as well. And in fact, we've got some really interesting integrations that customers have built, really with all Dome9 features, but with this one in particular, one that springs to mind is a bit of a ServiceNow integration where a help desk ticket comes in, it identifies maybe a resource on AWS, and as part of that help desk ticket process, there's a process that sort of shells out to Dome9, consumes a dynamic access lease for that help desk analyst to come in and troubleshoot the problem. They probably feel like it's been open all the time because it's transparent to them, yet under the covers, we're manipulating and giving them access, and only them access on a time-limited, on-demand basis. For those users, so that's kind of the non-interactive use case. There's one other path that you can consume these with, and that's kind of for a business user who isn't as comfortable in an administrative portal like Dome9. We do have mobile applications for both iOS and Android. Just like you saw on the IAM safety side, we have the same capabilities to be able to consume a dynamic access lease within mobile applications. So a little more of a sort of a business user probably a workflow than a technical one. So we talked a little bit about some key capabilities. We talked about clarity. We talked about tamper protection. We talked about dynamic access leasing. We talked about region lock, and we talked about IAM protection. What we really didn't talk about too much in this webinar was compliance and governance. We do have separate webinar sessions dedicated to that. It's a capability that Dome9 introduced last year, on top of some other sort of compliance-focused capabilities already. We talked about things like region lock and tamper protection. Those definitely speak to keeping a compliant infrastructure. But compliance and governance is really more squarely focused on a set of measurements we can perform against our infrastructure as service environments to let us know how close or how far to an ideal sort of configuration we are, whether that's an external data security standard like PCI or something maybe a little less formal, or a more best practice driven kind of approach with AWS or Azure. So it's in this way that, and of course in the way that you can consume these services either by interactively with the with Dome9 or via API. And we really aim to give you one level of abstraction higher than your particular infrastructure as a service platform. The vision for compliance within Dome9 is kind of write one policy, run it anywhere, right? And so that is the idea or the value prop behind the compliance and governance suite within Dome9. And with that, that's really what we wanted to share with you today at the webinar. I think we probably, just do a quick time check, it looks like we do have time for a couple questions. So maybe that's what we'll do next.
Great. Well, thank you, Patrick. Yes, we do have two questions from folks, and the first one being, how is Clarity visualization different than what I get from an IaaS provider?
Yeah. Well, that's a very, very good question. Let's have a look. And I will reshare my screen here as I get back into Clarity. Perhaps my Wi-Fi is just a little bit slow today. Let's talk a little bit about as Clarity loads. So Clarity is very, very good at showing you context. Right? There's certainly nothing wrong with the security sort of administrative interface that we have within AWS or Azure, but Clarity kind of extends that perspective with context, right? So let's try and load up Clarity. We'll choose a region. Right, it's about how your in the first kind of interface, how your VPCs relate to each other. Getting that sort of information out of really any cloud console is difficult. But what's maybe even more challenging is the deeper dive view we do once we choose a particular VPC. You really, the interface that competes sort of with this one. If we take a look at the console, I have that open still. Sort of the security group administration interface within AWS looks a little bit like this. And again, it's not that there isn't the control to do whatever you need to do. It's that understanding the relationships between these security groups, and then following on from that, where your traffic has potential to flow within your network. That Clarity is very, very good at illustrating. Right, even without touching a thing, as I explained before. Right, I can understand at a glance what security groups are really sort of exposing data, and if they should be, versus which, those that aren't. And so that's the potential of Clarity, and I think that's the power of Clarity.
Great. Thank you for that, Patrick. The second question is, how is your IAM protection more advanced than AWS or what Azure has to offer?
Yeah, so the IAM side is exclusively AWS today. It's really built for AWS identity and access management sort of model, and it's supplementary to what we have for controls afforded to us by AWS already. Things like MFA. Those are very important, of course, but I think of the use case like, maybe you're utilizing MFA, you're logged in at your workstation at work, your attention is grabbed away, you leave your desk, and you've got a pre-authenticated session into your cloud console, even using MFA, that you've now just left open, right? That is a vector of compromise, especially with the amount of power sort of concentrated within those controls within AWS. That's a vector of compromise that we think is worth securing. It's not the main use case, right? The main use case for IAM safety is really about, external man in the browser, credential theft kind of scenarios where I'm able to log in using somebody else's privileged credentials, right? It's that last stop. I think when we think about these, and I made reference to it once, I think, in the webinar, these sort of code space kind of events where, look, you've done all your due diligence on the network security side. You've got Dome9 working for you there, with Tamper Protection and visualization and making your network security management that much simpler and more efficient. Yet all of the focus there is for naught if you have, permissive accounts or accounts with much privilege that aren't secured, that people maybe share credentials, that kind of sort of paradigm. Then you've got a real challenge in terms of, if those credentials are compromised, if somebody can log in as me, then what? And that's the scenario that IAM safety really fits. So it's supplementary, right? It doesn't compete with those controls that we get from our technology integration partners, but it's an additional line of defense.
Great. Well, thank you, Patrick. And everyone, just to let you know, this concludes today's webinar. Thank you for attending. If you have any questions on the information presented today, please don't hesitate to reach out to Patrick. His email is patrick@dome9.com. A few quick items. We have a solution brief that complements this webinar that can be found under our resources section on our website. Please go to briefs, and there is a SecOps solution brief. Please feel free to take a look at that when you have an opportunity. If you like the webinar today and would like to hear more about the solutions Dome9 provides, please go to our website and sign up for one or several of our upcoming webinars this quarter. We have a series going, located again on our resources page on our website. If there's a topic you would like us to discuss, please don't hesitate to contact us through our website and let us know. With that, thank you and have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.